I almost didn't go that night. I know that sounds like something people say to make a story sound more dramatic, like they're building suspense on purpose. But I genuinely, truly, almost didn't go. My boots were untied. My jacket still had a coffee stain on the left sleeve from 3 days ago. And the diplomatic transit pass that was supposed to get me through the outer ring checkpoint had been sitting in the bottom of my duffel bag under a broken flashlight and 2 expired protein bars since Tuesday. I almost didn't go. But I did. And that changed everything. My name is Elias Vorn. I was 26 years old and working as a cultural liaison officer for the Terran Diplomatic Exchange Program, which sounds a lot more impressive than it actually was. In practical terms, it meant I was the guy they sent to events when they needed a human face in the room. Not a general, not a senator, not even a proper ambassador, just a face, a representative, someone who could stand in a reception hall full of beings from 17 different star systems and smile without flinching. I was good at the smiling part. That was literally in my performance review. Officer Vorn demonstrates exceptional composure in multi-species diplomatic environments. His ability to maintain a non-threatening, approachable demeanor across cultural contexts is a notable asset. Translation: he smiles a lot and doesn't panic when something with 4 heads walks up to him. The event that night was called the Luminary Convocation. It happened once every 7 years, a rotating diplomatic gathering hosted by one of the Galactic Compact's founding species. This particular rotation had landed on the Valdreshan Dominion, which meant the venue was the Valdreshan Cultural Embassy on the edge of Terran District 7, a part of the city that had been rebuilt twice since first contact and still smelled vaguely of ionized air and street food. The Valdreshans were old, ancient by galactic standards. Their civilization had been spacefaring for over 4,000 years. They were tall, most of them between 7 and 8 feet, with pale silver-blue skin, elongated limbs, and eyes that shifted color depending on their emotional state. Their blood ran dark, almost violet black. Their culture valued lineage, ceremony, and a very specific form of political theater that humans had never quite cracked. Most of the diplomatic community called them vampires behind closed doors, not because of anything malicious, just because they looked the part: the pale skin, the slow, deliberate movements, the way their eyes caught light like cut glass. One of the senior embassy staff had made the comparison at a briefing 2 years ago, and it stuck. I always thought it was reductive, a little lazy even. But I understood it. The Valdreshans had a presence. Walk into a room with one of them and you felt it. This low-frequency awareness, like your body knew before your brain, did that something significant was nearby. That night, I felt it the moment I stepped through the checkpoint gate. The checkpoint itself was a marvel of engineering that I'd never fully gotten used to. It was called a resonance arch, a curved structure about 40 feet tall, built from some kind of alloy that didn't have a common name in any human language. It scanned you as you walked through. Not just for weapons or contraband, it read your biological signature, your species designation, your diplomatic clearance level, and apparently something called your harmonic coefficient, which no one had ever explained to me in terms I could actually understand. I handed my transit pass to the processing terminal and waited. The terminal was manned, if that's the right word, by a Galran officer. Galran were one of the Compact's security species. They were roughly humanoid but broader, with 4 arms, a reinforced cranial ridge, and a permanent expression that looked like they were mildly disappointed in you. Their armor was standard-issue Compact security black, with luminescent rank markings on the shoulder plates that pulsed slowly, like breathing. The Galran officer scanned my pass, looked at me, scanned it again. Human, he said. It wasn't a question. It was more like an observation made under mild protest. That's right, I said. Cultural liaison. Yes, sir. He looked at me for another 3 seconds, which, in Galran interaction, is actually a significant amount of time. Then he handed my pass back, made a mark on his datapad, and waved me through. I walked under the arch. Inside, the Valdreshan embassy opened up into something that didn't feel like a building anymore. The ceiling was 100 feet overhead, a curved dome of translucent material that showed the night sky above, except the night sky here had been subtly filtered, so that you could see stars that weren't normally visible from this latitude. Whole constellations that belonged to other systems, projected with enough precision that astronomers in the crowd were probably having quiet fits. The floor was dark stone, real stone, shipped from Valdres Prime with veins of something luminescent running through it like frozen lightning. The ambient light was low, not dark exactly, but intimate. The kind of light that made everything feel like it was happening inside a memory. There were maybe 300 beings in that room. I recognized perhaps 40% of them. Terrans, humans, made up maybe 15% of the crowd. The rest were spread across the compact species roster. Galran in formal dress rather than armor, Savathi delegates with their characteristic dual-toned robes, a cluster of Marathi who stood motionless near the eastern wall in the way their species did when they were processing social information, and scattered throughout tall, silver blue, moving like they had all the time in the universe, the Valdresians. I found the Terran delegation's designated standing area and checked in with my supervisor, a woman named Cassidy Marsh, who had been doing this job for 11 years, and had the calm of someone who had seen everything twice. "You're late," she said without looking up from her data pad. "I'm exactly on time." "I said you're late," she glanced up. "There's a coffee stain on your jacket." "I know. Don't let anyone photograph you." She handed me a translation earpiece and pointed me toward the reception floor. My job for the evening was simple. Circulate, represent, don't cause any diplomatic incidents, and smile at anything that looked in my direction. Simple. The first hour was exactly what I expected. I made small talk with two Savathi trade representatives who were interested in Terran agricultural techniques. I ate something off a passing serving tray that tasted like citrus and copper and didn't ask what it was. I listened to a Galran cultural attaché explain, at some length, the historical significance of the particular shade of black used in traditional Galran formal dress. It was the usual texture of these events, interesting in flashes, mostly a lot of waiting. And then the Valdresian delegation arrived. They didn't make an announcement, they didn't need to. The room just shifted, like a tide going out. Conversations paused, beings turned almost involuntarily. The Valdresian party moved through the main entrance in a loose formation. 5 of them, each one moving with that particular unhurried grace that made you feel like time was flowing differently around them. I'd met Valdresians before, had briefings, attended smaller functions where 1 or 2 were present, but I'd never seen a full formal party at an event of this scale, dressed in Valdresian ceremonial attire. It was something. The robes were layered, deep blacks and purples with structural elements I couldn't identify woven through the fabric, catching light in ways that made the garments look almost 3-dimensional. Their jewelry, if that's what it was, seemed to grow from the material rather than sit on top of it. And their eyes, at formal occasions, Valdresians wore a kind of film over their eyes that amplified the color shift. So instead of subtle color changes, their eyes moved through full spectrums. Watching them was like watching weather happen in real time. 4 of the 5 I couldn't immediately identify, but the one at the center of the group, the one who walked slightly ahead of the others, not because she was being aggressive, but because the others naturally left that space for her, I knew from the briefing materials. Princess Serevith Valdraken, daughter of the Valdresian High Sovereign, 3rd in the line of succession. 22 years old by Valdresian counting, which corresponded to somewhere around 240 Terran years, though she appeared to be in her mid-20s by any humanoid standard. She had been designated as the Dominion's primary representative at this convocation, specifically because her generation of Valdresian nobility was considered the most diplomatically progressive in recorded history. She was tall like all Valdresians, with the silver-blue skin and the shifting eyes. Her hair was black with filaments of silver running through it that I couldn't tell were natural or decorative. Her robes were the deepest purple in the room, with a collar that framed her face like architecture. I looked at her the way you look at someone you've been briefed on. Professionally curious, noting details for later reporting. And then she looked at me. Her eyes found me across 30 feet of crowded diplomatic floor, and they stopped, just for a second. 2 seconds. The color in them shifted. I didn't know the full Valdresian color language well enough to read it precisely, but it moved from the cool blue they'd been when she entered to something warmer, almost amber. I did what I always did when someone looked at me at these events. I smiled. Not a big smile, not a performance, just the natural, reflexive human response to eye contact. The kind of smile you give a stranger when you're both reaching for the same thing on a shelf. Polite, warm, completely automatic. She looked at me for one more second. And then her party moved on, and she moved with them, and I lost sight of her in the crowd. I turned back to my drink and forgot about it entirely. Chapter 2, 3 Weeks of Nothing. For 3 weeks after the luminary convocation, nothing happened. Which was normal. Most diplomatic events were like throwing a stone in a lake. You saw the splash, and then the water settled, and that was it. I filed my attendee report, noted the interactions I'd had, confirmed I hadn't caused any incidents, and went back to my regular rotation. My regular rotation was not glamorous. It involved a lot of data entry, a lot of cultural sensitivity briefings, and twice a week, a conversation practice session where I'd talk with a language AI programmed to simulate non-Terran speech patterns. The goal was fluency in diplomatic context reading, understanding not just what was being said, but the layers underneath it. I was decent at it, not the best on the team, but consistent. 3 weeks after the convocation, I was in the middle of a particularly tedious filing cycle when Cassidy Marsh appeared in the doorway of my office with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. She looked uncertain. Cassidy Marsh was never uncertain. "Vorn," she said. "Yeah. You need to come to my office." I saved my work and followed her down the hall. Her office was at the end of the diplomatic services corridor, a corner room with a view of the transit hub below. She closed the door, which was also unusual. Then she stood on the other side of her desk and didn't sit down. "Do you remember the luminary convocation?" she said. "Of course." "Do you remember the Valdreshan delegation?" I thought back. Yes, 5 of them. Princess Sarevith led the party. "Did you have any interaction with any of them?" I went through my memory of the evening. No direct interaction. There was a moment of eye contact with the princess early in the evening, but no conversation. I filed it as a non-event. Cassidy picked up her datapad and looked at it for a moment, set it down, picked it up again. "We received a formal communication this morning," she said, "from the Valdreshan Dominion's diplomatic office, addressed specifically to the Terran exchange program." "Okay. They've requested a second meeting. At the embassy. That's not unusual for post-convocation follow-up." "Elias," she almost never used my first name. "They didn't request a delegation. They requested a specific individual." A pause. "They requested you." I stared at her. "Me?" "I name, Elias Vorn, Cultural Liaison Officer, Terran Diplomatic Exchange Program." They cited the convocation as the originating context, and they used formal Valdreshan request language that our translators are still arguing over. But the consensus is, she paused. The consensus is that it's not a casual social request. In Valdreshan diplomatic protocol, this level of specificity in a personal request carries significant weight. I sat down, or rather I backed up until the chair found me. "What kind of weight?" Cassidy looked at her datapad again. "Our cultural analysis team has been on it since the communication came in. The specific phrasing used suggests." She stopped, started again. "In Valdreshan culture, there's a concept called varison. It roughly translates as recognized potential. It's used to describe someone who has demonstrated, usually without awareness of the cultural significance, a quality that is considered rare and valuable within their society." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means the princess saw something in you at the convocation. Something that registered as significant by Valdreshan cultural standards. And now, she wants a formal meeting to—" Cassidy set the datapad down very carefully. "To determine whether that recognition was accurate." I thought about the 2 seconds of eye contact. The smile. The automatic, reflexive, totally meaningless smile. I smiled at her, I said. "That's all that happened, I smiled at her." "I know. I smile at everyone." "I know that too." "Cassidy, what does this actually mean? What are they expecting from this meeting?" She looked at me with the expression of someone who has read a briefing document they would have preferred not to read. "We don't fully know yet," she said. "But the cultural analysis team thinks you should be prepared for the possibility that the Valdreshan princess may be considering you as a candidate for something called a Varanthal." Which is... She picked up her data pad one more time. A life-bonded partner, she said. What humans would call a husband. The room was very quiet for a moment. Because I smiled at her. Because you smiled at her. I thought about this for a long time. Then I said, I'm going to need a new jacket. Part 2, The Embassy at Dusk. Chapter 3, Briefing Season. The week before the meeting, I sat through more briefings than I had in my entire previous career. They brought in specialists, not just from the exchange program, but from the Xenocultural Institute, from the Compact Diplomatic Relations Office, from a private consulting firm that specialized in Valdreshan behavioral analysis. I sat in a small conference room with a rotating cast of people who all had different opinions about what was going to happen and how I should handle it. The one thing they agreed on was this: do not treat this like a standard diplomatic meeting. The Valdreshans had a word, the Vari, that described the specific kind of false-face behavior they found most offensive. It translated roughly as performance of authenticity, meaning pretending to be genuine while actually following a script. They could apparently detect it. Their sensory apparatus was finely tuned enough to pick up micro-variations in biometric output, changes in skin temperature, pulse irregularities, the specific chemical signatures of stress or deception. In other words, if I tried to be diplomatic in the way I was trained to be diplomatic, they would know, and it would be worse than if I just showed up as myself. So what you're telling me, I said at one point to a woman from the Institute named Dr. Penha, is that the best preparation I can do for this meeting is no preparation. Not exactly, she said. We want you to understand the cultural context. But yes, the single most important thing you can do when you're in that room is be genuinely yourself. Don't filter, don't perform, don't reach for diplomatic language when natural language is available. That's the opposite of everything I've been trained to do. Yes, fantastic. She showed me cultural materials, Valdreshan social architecture, the concept of varison in more depth. The history of Valdreshan diplomatic bonding. Apparently it wasn't uncommon for Valdreshans to form life bonds with members of other species, and such bonds carried significant political and social weight in their culture. They weren't romantic in exactly the way humans understood romance. They were more like a recognition of complementary essence. A formal declaration that two beings enhanced each other's existence in ways that were culturally legible and valuable. Has a Valdreshan ever bonded with a human before? I asked. Dr. Penha's pause was just slightly too long. There are 2 documented historical cases, she said. Both occurred in the early contact period. How did they turn out? One ended with both parties living long and productive lives. The human in that case was an early contact anthropologist. She lived to 112, which was considered remarkable. And the others? The other ended poorly, but the circumstances were entirely different and involved a broader political conflict that had nothing to do with the bond itself. I decided not to ask for details. The physical briefings were interesting in a different way. Valdreshan biology was not human biology. Their metabolism ran slower, their sensory processing was broader, and they had what the briefing material described as a harmonic resonance sensitivity, an ability to perceive things through low-frequency vibration that humans couldn't consciously access. This was part of how they read emotional states, not magic, not telepathy. Just a biological toolkit that was wider than ours. They also, and this was the part the briefing team mentioned somewhat carefully, had an extended lifespan. Valdreshans routinely lived to somewhere between 800 and 1,000 years. Princess Sarevith, at the equivalent of her mid-20s, was very young for her species. Bonding with a human meant bonding with someone who would live, at best, perhaps 90 or 100 years more. She knows that, Dr. Penha said when I raised it. In Valdreshan philosophy, a shorter lifespan doesn't diminish the value of a bond. It's understood that some connections are bounded by time. That's considered a different quality of intensity, not a lesser one. I thought about that. There was something almost crushingly generous about that idea. The most generous idea I'd encountered in years of working with non-Terran cultures. That a being who would outlive me by 6 or 7 centuries looked at a human life and said, that's still worth it. I filed that thought away somewhere and didn't look at it too directly. The night before the meeting, I sat on the edge of my bunk in my transit housing room and tried not to think too hard about any of it. My room was small, standard diplomatic housing, functional, clean, characterless. A window showed the city at night, the glow of the transit hub cutting orange against the dark. Somewhere out there, past the Terran district, past the outer ring checkpoint, the Valdreshan embassy was lit up in whatever way Valdreshans lit things up when they were preparing to receive a guest. I thought about the smile. The stupid, automatic, reflexive smile. I'd been smiling at things my whole life without thinking about it. It was just something I did, not a calculated gesture, not a social tool. Just when something looked at me, I acknowledged it. When something met my eyes, I tried to communicate, I see you, I'm not a threat, this is okay. My mom used to say I smiled in my sleep when I was a baby. I have no idea if that's true, but she said it like it was her favorite fact about me. I wondered what the Valdreshan color language equivalent of a smile was. I wondered what it had felt like to be on the other side of mine. Then I stopped wondering, put in my earpiece to review the afternoon's final cultural briefing one more time, and fell asleep somewhere in the middle of a lecture on Valdreshan formal greeting postures. Chapter 4, Walking In. The Valdreshan embassy was different in the daytime. At the convocation, with hundreds of beings and all that ceremony, it had felt like an event space, vast and beautiful and curated. In the late afternoon light of a meeting day, with only the embassy's regular staff and a small Terran support team, it felt like what it actually was. A home, or at least a representation of one. The exterior of the building was stone and metal in a style that humans kept trying to categorize as Gothic or Art Nouveau, and that Valdreshan architects would probably find both comparisons insulting. It just looked like something built by a species that had been building things for 4,000 years, and knew exactly what they wanted. I arrived with Cassidy Marsh and 2 cultural specialists who would wait outside the meeting room. Protocol had been confirmed. This was a first contact meeting by Valdreshan social standards, a personal meeting, which meant I would go in with support staff accessible but not present, just me and whoever the Valdreshans brought. We were met at the entrance by a Valdreshan staff member who introduced herself in Valdreshan and then, seeing my expression, smoothly switched to Galactic Standard. Her name was something I couldn't quite replicate, and she told me to call her Vale. She was younger than the princess, or appeared to be, and carried a datapad with both hands in the Valdreshan formal reception posture, which I recognized from my briefings and found oddly comforting. She led us through the entrance hall, which was gorgeous in a way that made me angry at myself for not having better words for it, and through 2 inner corridors to a set of doors that were the deep purple-black of Valdreshan formal spaces. "The princess will join you shortly," Vale said. "She asks that you accept the waiting space as a gesture of consideration. She wanted you to have time to settle before the meeting began." "That's very thoughtful," I said. "Thank you." Vale looked at me for a half-second longer than the exchange required. Then she nodded and opened the doors. The room inside was smaller than I expected. Not a formal reception hall. A conversation room, essentially, 2 chairs that were obviously sized for Valdreshan occupants, but had been fitted with supplementary cushioning in what I suspected was an attempt at human accommodation. A low table between them with a surface that seemed to emit its own soft light. No technology that I could see, which was either reassuring or alarming depending on how you thought about it. The walls held what appeared to be artwork, not pictures exactly. 3-dimensional assemblages of material that I couldn't identify, arranged in patterns that shifted subtly when you changed your angle of view. I sat down, or rather I sat up. The Valdreshan chairs were designed for beings a foot and a half taller than me, so sitting in one meant I was perched more than seated, my feet not quite flat on the floor. I looked at the art on the wall. I waited. She came in without announcement. One moment the room held only me and the ambient light. And then the door opened and Princess Sarevith Val Draken walked in, and the quality of the air in the room changed in a way I would have dismissed as imagination if I hadn't been briefed about the harmonic resonance thing. She was wearing something far less formal than at the convocation. A layered garment in dark blue and gray that still had that Valdreshan structural quality but moved more naturally. Her silver-threaded hair was down. Her eyes, when they settled on me, were the same amber-warm color they'd shifted to at the convocation, at least, that's what I thought. I was still shaky on the color language. She looked at my chair situation, and the corner of her mouth did something that I think was the Valdreshan equivalent of a suppressed laugh. "I asked for human-compatible furniture," she said. Her galactic standard was precise, with a musical quality to the consonants that was distinctive Valdreshan. "I am told this was an attempt." "It's a valiant attempt," I said. She sat in the other chair, which she occupied the way she was meant to, fully, without that perched quality I had. And she looked at me with those shifting amber eyes, and for a moment we just both existed in the same room without saying anything. Then she said, "You smiled at me." "I know," I said. "I do that, I paused. "It's automatic, honestly. I don't always realize I'm doing it." "I know," she said. "That is what I saw." I thought about that for a moment. "What did it look like from where you were standing?" She tilted her head. It was a very deliberate movement. Valdreshans used head tilts as punctuation in ways that humans also did, but with more explicit meaning. This one, from my briefing, indicated considered reflection. "There are 312 beings in a formal compact gathering," she said. "And most of them, when they look at a Valdreshan, are performing something, performing respect, performing indifference, performing interest they do not feel, or concealing interest they do feel." "Diplomatic theater," I said. "Yes, your word for it is better than ours, actually. We call it the Vari." She paused. "You smiled at me and I felt no the Vari in it. Just—" She paused again, and I got the sense she was choosing a standard word carefully. "Just acknowledgement, clean acknowledgement, like opening a window." I sat with that for a moment. "That's a generous read on a reflex," I said. "Perhaps." Her eyes shifted back toward the cool blue briefly, then warming again. "But in my experience, true reflexes reveal true character. What someone does without thinking is who they are. What someone does after thinking is who they want to be seen as." I felt the weight of that one settle into my chest. "That's a pretty sophisticated argument for taking a smile seriously," I said. "My people have had 4,000 years to develop sophisticated arguments," she said. "We have quite a collection." And I laughed, not a polite laugh, an actual, surprised, genuine laugh that echoed in the small room. And she watched it happen with those amber eyes, and they got warmer still. Part 3, the declaration. Chapter 5, what happens when she says your name. We met 3 more times in the following month. Each time was different. The second was more formal. The princess brought one of her senior court advisors, and I brought Cassidy, and we spent 2 hours talking about Terran Valdreshan cultural exchange initiatives that were probably not entirely the point. The third was a tour of the embassy's cultural archive, which was 3 floors of the most extraordinary collection of non-Terran history I'd ever been in the same building with, and the princess served as guide with a running commentary that ranged from historically precise to genuinely funny. The 4th meeting was just the 2 of us again. We talked for 4 hours. I'm not sure about what exactly. It moved through so many subjects that looking back I can only give you the texture of it rather than the content. Her childhood on Valdres Prime, which sounded alternately overwhelming and beautiful. My childhood in a city that no longer existed in its original form, having been restructured twice since first contact. The experience of carrying a species representation into a room. The weight of being looked at as a symbol rather than a person. "They look at me and see the Dominion," she said at one point. "They look at you and see humanity." "It's a lot to carry." "Yes," a pause, "but I think you carry it without knowing you're carrying it, which makes it lighter. Or it means I haven't noticed how heavy it is." She considered this. Both can be true. I told her things I hadn't told anyone at work, about the days when the diplomatic work felt hollow. About the particular loneliness of being the human in a room full of beings who were all, at some level, more powerful, more established, more ancient. About what it felt like to represent a species that had been in space for less than 2 centuries, and was still figuring out which fork to use at the galactic dinner table. She listened in a way that I learned was distinctly Valdreshan, very still, eyes fully present, no interruptions. When she did respond, she had clearly heard everything, not just the parts that were easiest to hear. "You have been in space for less than 2 centuries, she said after one of my more vulnerable moments. "And you are here, in this room, being requested by name by the heir of a 4,000-year civilization." She paused. "Your species does not move slowly." We really don't, I said. I find that, she searched for the word, I find that thrilling in a way I did not expect. After the fourth meeting, Cassidy was waiting for me in the car. She looked at me for a long moment after I got in. How did it go? She said. Fine, I said. Another pause. She made me tea, I said. I didn't ask her what it was because I didn't want to make it weird. It tasted like pine needles and something I couldn't identify, and I drank all of it. Were you briefed on Valdreshan's ceremonial tea preparation? Briefly. Did you know that offering tea in a private meeting context carries social significance in Valdreshan culture? I'm learning that now. Cassidy looked at the road ahead. Elias. I need you to tell me honestly, is this still a diplomatic assignment for you? I thought about 4 hours of conversation, pine needle tea, amber eyes that shifted toward warmth. I don't know, I said honestly. Cassidy nodded slowly. Okay, she said, okay. She didn't say anything else on the drive back. Chapter 6, The Night of the Valenthar. The fifth meeting wasn't scheduled. I got the notification at 11 o'clock at night, 3 days after the fourth meeting, through a formal channel but in informal language, which Vale later explained was itself a specific Valdreshan social signal, meaning urgency in a personal context. The message said that Princess Saravith was hosting a small gathering at the embassy and would be honored by my attendance if I was available. I was available. I got there at midnight. The embassy at night had a quality that the daytime version lacked. The city's ambient light mixed with whatever the Valdreshans used for interior lighting created something that looked less like a building and more like a structure that had grown from the landscape. The gathering was small, maybe 12 beings, a mix of Valdreshans and one Savathi dignitary I vaguely recognized. They were gathered in a room I hadn't seen before, on the upper floor of the embassy, with windows that ran floor to ceiling and showed the city laid out below. The princess was in the center of the group. She was dressed less formally than any of our other meetings, something in dark green and silver that made the silver threads in her hair look deliberate. She saw me the moment I came in. She crossed the room toward me, which I would learn later was a specific social gesture in Valdreshan court culture. A host who comes to meet a guest, rather than receiving them, is making a statement. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that she walked toward me and I met her halfway and we stood together at the edge of the room's main conversation area. I am glad you came, she said. I did not know if you would. Why wouldn't I? She studied my face. Because what I am about to do this evening may surprise you, and I did not want to, she paused. I did not want to put you in a situation you had not chosen. I looked around the room. The other guests were engaged in their conversations, but I noticed, with a slow settling feeling in my stomach, that there was an arrangement to the room, a specific positioning. The guests arranged loosely around an open central space. An elderly Valdreshan standing near the far wall who had a quality of stillness that marked them as either very senior or very ceremonially significant. What's happening tonight? I said. There is a ceremony, she said. Valdreshan in form, it is called the Valenthar. It means... She paused again, and I recognized the pause now as the one where she was choosing words precisely. It means the speaking of a recognized name. What does that mean? She looked at me with those amber eyes, and they were fully, completely warm. In our culture, she said, when someone recognizes a Varison, a potential bond, they have a period of consideration. This is considered respectful. It allows both parties to understand what is being perceived before anything is formalized. She paused. My period of consideration is complete. And, I said, though I think I already knew. And I would like to speak your name tonight, she said. In the Valenthar, before my court and before a witness, which is how in our culture a recognition becomes a statement. I stood very still for a moment. What does that mean for me? I said. If you speak my name, what does it mean for you, For my succession, for my political standing, she tilted her head, the considered reflection tilt. It will be complex. There will be voices in my court who object. There are those who believe a bond with a human is politically disadvantageous, culturally inappropriate, biologically. She stopped. There will be objections. And you're going to do it anyway. I am asking, she said quietly, if you will allow me to. The room was quiet except for the distant city sounds through the glass. I thought about the smile, the stupid, automatic, reflexive smile across 30 feet of diplomatic floor. I thought about pine needle tea and 4 hours of conversation. I thought about clean acknowledgement, like opening a window. "What do I need to do?" I said. "You only need to stand here," she said, "and be yourself, which is all you have ever done." The ceremony was brief, maybe 20 minutes. The elderly Valdreshan near the wall, Vale, had quietly appeared at my elbow to tell me she was a keeper of names. A ceremonial court role that functioned as witness and recorder, stood in the central space, and spoke in formal Valdreshan. My earpiece gave me a partial translation that I later had fully translated. The full text said, roughly, "We are gathered in the presence of recognition. Let what is seen be spoken. Let what is spoken be recorded. Let what is recorded be real." The princess stood before the keeper. She spoke clearly in Valdreshan, in formal court register. She spoke my name. Not in standard, in Valdreshan, a pronunciation of my name that I had never heard before and that made it sound in that language like something worth saying. Elias Vorn of Terra, recognized by Sarevith Val Draken of the Valdreshan Dominion as her Varanthal candidate. Let this name be known. Let this bond be considered. Let the consideration become real. The keeper inclined her head. The room was very still. And then the Savathi dignitary, who was seated in the corner and had been silent throughout, made a sound that every species in the compact recognized as surprise. And I realized that, in the galaxy's small and interconnected diplomatic community, what had just happened in this room on the upper floor of the Valdreshan embassy in the middle of a city, at midnight, was going to be known in 17 star systems by morning. Part 4, What Followed. Chapter 7, The 48 Hours That Changed Everything. I want to be honest about the 48 hours after the Valenthar. They were chaotic, not in a dramatic way, not in the way stories about diplomacy and interspecies politics usually are, with shouting and confrontations and people giving speeches. They were chaotic in the way that genuinely unexpected things are chaotic. Quietly, internally, in small offices and private communications, and the expressions on people's faces when they didn't know you were watching. I woke up the morning after the ceremony to 47 messages. 12 were from the Terran Diplomatic Exchange Program's Communications Office. 8 were from Cassidy. 6 were from Dr. Penha at the Xenocultural Institute. 4 were from numbers I didn't recognize. 1 was from my mother. I read my mother's first. It said in its entirety, "Elias, I don't know exactly what happened, but someone from the government called me at 7 in the morning, and now I'm seeing your name on the news networks. Call me when you can. I love you. Also, please eat something." The news networks. I checked. The Savathi dignitary had talked, or someone in the embassy had, or the keeper of names had filed her record and it had entered the Compact's diplomatic information system and someone had extracted it. I wasn't sure of the mechanism, but the result was that the Valenthar was documented on 3 major Compact news platforms by 6 in the morning. The headlines were varied. In Terran media, Vampire Princess declares human diplomat her future husband, what this means for Terran Valdreshan relations. In Galran feeds, Valdreshan succession crisis, Princess names non-Valdreshan bond candidate. In Savathi cultural outlets, historic Valdreshan Varanthal recognition, a new chapter in multi-species bonding history. I sat on the edge of my bunk and read these headlines for a while. Then I called Cassidy. She picked up before the second ring. "Are you okay?" she said. "I think so," I said. "Is this as significant as it seems?" "It is significantly more significant than it seems," she said. "In terms of political implications, the last time a member of the Valdreshan royal succession declared an interspecies Varanthal was..." A pause. "Our historians are working on that. The short answer is, very rarely." "What does the program want to do?" "The program wants to do whatever you think is right," she said, and she said it in a way that made it clear she personally meant it even if the institutional version was more complicated. "Elias, this is your life, not a diplomatic assignment. The program will support you and advise you, but we're not going to direct you here." "What would you do," I said, "if you were me?" She was quiet for a moment. I would remember why you went to that convocation in the first place, she said. And I would remember what you told me in the car on the way home from the fourth meeting. I thought about what I'd said in the car. I don't know. Which wasn't the same as no. Which wasn't the same as I'm not sure I want this. It was the same as I'm not certain enough yet to say yes, but certainty had a way of arriving in its own time. What's the Valdreshan Dominion saying? I asked. There's a public silence so far, Cassidy said, which our analysts say is actually a positive signal. A negative response from the Dominion would have been immediate. Silence means the internal deliberation is happening and it's not resolved, which means there's a faction that's open to it. And the ones who aren't open to it. You're going to meet some of them, she said. That's going to be unavoidable, but Elias, the princess, knew that when she made the declaration. She chose to make it anyway. 2 days after the Valenthar, I received a second formal communication from the Valdreshan embassy. This one was addressed to me personally, not to the program. It was written in formal Valdreshan and then in standard, and it was from Sarevith herself. It said, Elias Vorn of Terra, I am aware that what I did at the Valenthar has created complications for you that you did not ask for. I want you to know that I do not believe the declaration requires you to commit to anything beyond your own continued honesty, which is all I have ever asked of you. I spoke your name because it was true that I saw what I saw. That truth exists regardless of what either of us decides afterward. There will be those in my court and in the broader compact who will attempt to make this situation into something other than what it is. I ask only that when they do, you remember what it was, a recognition. Nothing more, nothing less. Your choices remain your own. Sarevith Valdraken. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back. I wrote in standard because my Valdreshan was approximately 5 words long, and those words were things like thank you and I understand. I wrote, Princess Sarevith, I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since that night, and I keep coming back to the same thing. I'm not afraid of the complications. I was surprised, yes. The 47 messages were a lot, but when I think about what actually happened in that room, what I feel is... I stopped, thought about it. What I feel is that someone looked at me and saw something true, and then stood up in front of witnesses and said it out loud. In my experience, that is one of the rarest and most valuable things one person can do for another. So thank you. I don't know what comes next, but I'm not running from it. Elias Vorn. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. 3 hours later, she replied. It was 3 words in Valdreshan. My earpiece translated them as, good, I'm glad. Chapter 8, The Complications arrived in the form of a delegation. 4 days after the Valenthar, the Valdreshan embassy requested a formal meeting between myself, the Terran Diplomatic Exchange Program, and a group of Valdreshan court officials who were described in the meeting invitation as cultural advisors. Cassidy's team spent an evening cross-referencing the names on the delegation list against our diplomatic records, and concluded, with some certainty, that 3 of the 4 were members of a faction within the Valdreshan court known informally as the Traditionalists. The Traditionalists were not, apparently, in favor of the Varanthal Declaration. The meeting took place in a neutral space, a conference facility in the diplomatic district that had been specifically designed for interspecies meetings, with adjustable furniture, a multilingual translation infrastructure, and walls that could be reconfigured to match any of 7 different species' preference for room dimension. I walked in with Cassidy and 2 senior advisors. The Valdreshan delegation was already seated, 4 of them, dressed in deep formal black, with the specific arrangement of jewelry that Dr. Penha had told me indicated court rank and conservative faction alignment. The leader of their delegation was an older Valdreshan male, Valdreshan aging being visible in subtle ways, a deepening of the silver-blue skin tone, and a stillness that accumulated rather than increased with age. His name, in standard translation, came out as something like Lord Varric, and he had the eyes of someone who had been in rooms like this for centuries. He looked at me with the Valdreshan version of a polite expression, which meant very little discernible expression at all. Liaison Officer Vorn, he said, thank you for meeting with us. Of course, I said, thank you for requesting it directly. A small pause, he hadn't expected directness, points apparently for being straight about it. "We wish to speak with you," he said, "about the nature of the declaration made by the princess." "I understand. We wish to be clear that our concern is not with you personally," he said, "nor with your species in general. The Valdreshan Dominion has maintained respectful relations with Terra since the early contact period." "I appreciate that," I said. "Our concern is with the precedent," he said. "The Varanthal declaration by a member of the succession line carries succession implications. Historically, such declarations have been made between members of established galactic families, lineages with multi-generational diplomatic standing. The Terran Confederation, while valued, has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries," I said. "Yes, I'm aware." He paused. "You understand our position." "I understand the argument," I said. "I'm not sure I agree with it, but I understand it." Another pause, longer this time. "You are very direct for a cultural liaison," he said. "I've been told," I said, "by people who know your culture much better than I do, that the princess values directness. I figured if her values are the relevant standard here, I should hold to them." Lord Varric looked at me for a long moment. His eyes shifted. I watched them go from the cool blue of formal neutrality to something slightly warmer, almost involuntarily. "That is," he stopped, "that is a well-constructed position." "I'm not trying to construct a position," I said. "I'm just telling you what I think." Which is what the princess seems to appreciate about me, for whatever reason. The meeting went on for another hour. The traditionalists raised 4 specific concerns: succession legitimacy, biological compatibility for Valdreshan cultural continuity purposes, the political optics within the compact, and the lifespan differential. I addressed each one. Not perfectly, not with the polish of a trained diplomat, but honestly, which kept surprising them. On succession, I'm not a succession strategy. I'm a person who apparently smiled at the right moment. Whatever the political implications are, they were the princess's to weigh, and she did. On biological compatibility, that's something the princess and I would need to discuss, not something you and I can resolve in this room. On political optics, with respect, the Valdreshan Dominion has been making decisions that defined galactic politics for 3,000 years before Terra reached orbit. I'd be cautious about letting optics drive this. On lifespan, I'll be honest. That one I think about. I think the princess thinks about it more than I do, and I think she's reached a conclusion I should respect. Lord Varric was quiet for a long time after that one. Then he said, very carefully, "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A human diplomat," he said, "performing confidence." And instead, he looked at me with those deep-set Valdreshan eyes. "Someone who is actually confident," he said, "without performing it." A pause. "It is, as the princess apparently recognized, a different thing entirely." The meeting ended. The delegation left. Cassidy watched them go and then turned to look at me. "I've been doing this for 11 years, she said. "Yeah. That's the first time I've ever seen a traditionalist faction leave a challenging meeting without formally registering an objection." I thought about it. "Is that significant?" "Ilias," she said, "they didn't object. In Valdreshan diplomatic protocol, not formally objecting after raising concerns means." "It means they're considering stepping back," I said, remembering something from a briefing. "It means they're considering stepping back," she confirmed. Part 5, the presentation. Chapter 9, the night they introduced me. 3 weeks after the Valenthar, the Valdreshan Dominion announced a formal reception. It was called a Varanthal presentation, a ceremony that occurred when a Valdreshan succession line member's bond declaration moved from the consideration phase to the formal introduction phase. In practical terms, it meant that Sarevith had cleared the internal court process. The objections had been heard, considered, and either resolved or set aside, and was now moving to the public phase. She was going to introduce me. Not as a diplomatic contact, not as a Terran liaison, not as the human with the reflexive smile. As her future husband. I found this out from Cassidy, who found it out from a Valdreshan cultural desk officer, who found it out from the formal invitation that arrived at the Terran Diplomatic Exchange program addressed to me by name and title, except the title on the invitation wasn't Cultural Liaison Officer. It said Varanthal candidate of the Valdreshan Dominion. I sat with that for a while. Then I called Dr. Penha. "How do I not mess this up?" I said. There was a pause on her end. "I thought you'd ask about protocol," she said, "or translation requirements, or the formal introduction sequence." "I know you'll brief me on all of that. I'm asking something else." "I know," she said gently. "Elias, you haven't messed anything up yet. You've been exactly what the princess recognized. The answer to how do I not mess this up is the same as it's always been: be yourself. Show up as you are." "I'm not sure I know how to be myself in front of a formal Valdreshan court." "You were yourself in front of Lord Varric and 3 traditionalist advisors," she said. "That worked out." I thought about that. Fair point. The reception was at the Valdreshan embassy. Full formal, 300 guests, the full spectrum of compact diplomatic representation, Valdreshan court dress, the works. I wore the best thing I owned, which Cassidy had tailored in the previous week and which fit perfectly except for a slight tension across the shoulders that I was choosing to ignore. No coffee stain, clean jacket, boots tied. I arrived with a small Terran delegation: Cassidy, Dr. Penha, 2 senior program officers, who would attend as my formal support representation. In Valdreshan protocol, the Varanthal candidates support group occupied a specific position in the reception space, and they'd been briefed thoroughly on their role. The room was the same great hall from the convocation. The same luminescent stone floor, the same dome ceiling showing filtered stars. But arranged differently now, less a cocktail reception and more a formal gathering, with a clear spatial logic that positioned the Valdreshan court at the center and arrayed the rest of the room around it. I was shown to a position at the edge of the court space by Vale, who had dressed for the occasion in something that suggested ceremonial rather than administrative function. She looked at me with that same half-second longer than necessary glance she'd given me at our first meeting. "You look," she started. "Human," I offered. "Present," she said. "You look present. It is the right quality for tonight." I stood in my designated position and waited. The room filled. I watched beings I recognized and beings I didn't file in and take their places with the efficient grace of a gathering that knew its own choreography. The Galran security contingent. The Savathi trade representatives. Several faces I'd seen at the convocation 3 months ago. Lord Varric, across the room in formal black, with eyes that found mine briefly and inclined, barely, but perceptibly, in something that might have been acknowledgement. Then the court music started. Valdreshan court music was, I don't have a good comparison for it. It wasn't like any human music I knew. It was more like a sound than a music, something that existed at the edge of what my ears could process, but that my body registered differently. A low harmonic thing that seemed to come from the walls as much as from any instrument. And then she came in. Sarevith Val Draken entered the hall in full formal Valdreshan court regalia, attended by her 4 senior court members in a formal procession that covered the length of the hall in about 90 seconds, but that I would have been hard-pressed to estimate as any specific duration because my sense of time did something non-standard. She was, I'm going to struggle with this description, so bear with me. She was wearing the full formal regalia of the Valdreshan succession, which was something I hadn't seen outside of historical imagery in briefing materials. The layered robes in midnight black and deep violet, structural elements woven through them that caught the hall's light and scattered it in ways that made her look, from certain angles, like she was surrounded by her own constellation. The silver threads in her hair had been arranged into something formal that I couldn't describe architecturally, but that was clearly significant because several people in the room reacted to it visually. Her eyes, with the formal amplifying film, were fully amber, the warmest color in the Valdreshan spectrum. She walked to the center of the court space and turned to face the room. And then she turned to face me. The room was very, very quiet. In formal Valdreshan, she spoke. My earpiece translated in real time. "I stand before the compact and before my court to speak a name I have already spoken in the smaller ceremony of recognition. I speak it now in the fuller ceremony of introduction, so that those who witness this moment may know what I know." A pause. Elias Vorn of Terra is not the first human to be recognized by Valdreshan eyes, but he is the first I have seen, and what I saw is this: a being whose first impulse in a room full of performance was to offer something true. A small thing, perhaps, a brief thing. But in my 4,000-year civilization's experience of the galaxy, small true things are rarer than they appear. I have looked at this man. She looked at me directly, the amber eyes full and clear. And I have seen someone worth standing beside, not because of his rank, not because of his species, not because of his age or his lineage or his political value, because of what he is when he is not thinking about what he is. I introduce him tonight as my Varanthal, my recognized partner, my future husband. Let this be known. The Keeper of Names spoke the formal acknowledgement. The court bowed, and the room, 300 beings from 17 star systems, was silent for one more second. Then the Savathi dignitary from the corner of the Valenthar ceremony. I'd learned by now that her name was Ambassador Tyrsh, and she had a reputation for being impossible to surprise, started clapping. Human style. She'd clearly learned it specifically for this moment. It caught on. Not everyone in the room clapped. Several species didn't have that gesture. But they had their own equivalents, and within 30 seconds the room was full of 17 different versions of acknowledgement, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. I stood in my designated position and felt something I didn't have a word for. Not quite joy, not quite fear, something in between that was louder than either. And then Sarevith crossed the court space toward me. In front of 300 beings, in front of her court, in front of the Compact's diplomatic community, in full formal regalia. She stopped in front of me. "Are you well?" she said quietly and standard, just for me. "I think so," I said. "I'm a little overwhelmed." "I was going to say present," I said. Vale used that word earlier, and I think she was right. The corner of her mouth did the suppressed laugh thing. "You are extraordinary," she said softly. "I smiled at you," I said. "I really cannot stress enough how automatic that was." "I know," she said, "and that is why it was extraordinary." She extended her hand, a gesture that was not Valdreshan but that she had clearly adopted from human protocol, probably specifically for this moment. I took it, and 300 beings from 17 star systems watched a human take the hand of a vampire princess, and none of them had seen it coming. Which honestly seemed about right. Part 6, The Aftermath. Chapter 10, What Came After. The weeks after the formal introduction moved fast and strange. I'm not going to tell you it was simple. It wasn't. The political reverberations ran through the compact diplomatic community like a stone dropped in water. The ripples went a long way and surprised people far from where they'd started. There were formal objections from 2 minor Valdreshan court families. There were questions in the Terran Confederation's diplomatic council. There was a lengthy editorial in a major galactic standard news outlet with the headline, "Can a human represent the values of an ancient royal succession?" Which I read once, very fast, and then put down and didn't read again. There were also, unexpectedly, moments of support from places I hadn't anticipated. Lord Varric issued a brief formal statement through the court communications office saying that while his faction had raised concerns, they had reviewed the Varanthal process and found it conducted with full protocol compliance, and that they were prepared to extend courtesy to the declared candidate. Coming from Lord Varric, Cassidy told me that was approximately the equivalent of a standing ovation. Ambassador Tyrsh from the Savathi delegation published a cultural commentary piece that became, apparently, widely read across the compact. I only caught the translated summary, but it said something along the lines of, "The significance of this recognition is not that a human has been elevated. It is that a Valdreshan princess looked at the galaxy's newest spacefaring species and saw something worth recognizing. 4,000 years of civilization recognized something in a civilization that has been in space for less than 2 centuries. Perhaps the older civilization knows something about the newer one that the newer one has not yet been told." I read that 3 times. Sarevith and I continued meeting, more frequently now and in more varied settings, sometimes at the embassy, sometimes in neutral diplomatic spaces, once at a cultural exhibition in the Terran district that she'd specifically requested to attend. We talked about the future in the way 2 people talk about a future that is genuinely uncertain, but that neither of them is afraid of. She told me more about the Valdreshan bonding process, what a Varanthal actually meant in practice as a partnership. It was less like a human marriage and more like, I kept coming back to the phrase deliberate entanglement, a formal acknowledgement that two lives were better understood in relation to each other. That didn't mean she expected me to abandon Terra or my work or my own culture. It meant that she intended to move through the world knowing I existed in it, and I was invited to do the same. There will be a ceremony, she said, in time on Valdres Prime. If you want that. What does it involve? Standing in a room full of my court and my family, she said, answering questions about your values and your intentions, a formal exchange of we translate it as essential truth, meaning you say something true about yourself that you haven't said to anyone else. That's terrifying, I said. Yes, she agreed without irony. When? There is no urgency, she said. We have time. I looked at her. You have considerably more time than I do. The amber eyes stayed warm. Then I will not waste yours, she said. Chapter 11, The Galrin Problem. 3 months after the introduction, I had my first real diplomatic confrontation. It didn't come from within the Valdresian court, or from any of the compact species I'd been expecting trouble from. It came from a group of Galrin officers at a formal compact security briefing that I attended as part of my exchange program duties. The briefing was about updated interspecies security protocols, routine, or should have been. I was there representing the Terran delegation in my liaison capacity, doing my normal job. The Valdresian situation was, in theory, a personal matter separate from my professional role. Galrin did not see it that way. The confrontation happened in the hallway outside the briefing room, after the formal session. 3 Galrin officers, not the senior officer from the Resonance Arch at the convocation, but similar in rank and bearing, stopped me as I was leaving. The one who spoke was a commander by rank. The luminescent markings on his shoulder plates pulsed with a frequency I recognized from my security briefings as indicating a mid-senior position. He was a full head taller than me, with 4 arms crossed in the Galrin posture that meant formally serious. Liaison Officer Vorn, he said. Commander, I said. We have followed the developments regarding the Valdresian Declaration with interest, he said. I imagine many people have. The Galrin Security Compact has a formal position on interspecies bonding arrangements that involve individuals with diplomatic clearance, he said. In the interest of procedural clarity, we want to ensure that you understand how the Valdresian arrangement may affect your standing access to certain classified compact security briefings going forward. This was, in diplomatic terms, a shot across the bow. It was framed as procedure, but it was actually a message. We have leverage here, and we want you to know it. I looked at the commander. He was watching me with the Galrin expression that looked like mild, permanent disappointment, and I thought about everything I'd been through in the past 3 months. The 47 messages, the traditionalist meeting, 300 beings watching me take the princess's hand. Commander, I said, are you telling me that my personal life is going to affect my professional standing? Or are you asking me a question that already has a predetermined answer, designed to communicate institutional discomfort with the Valdresian Declaration? A pause. He was not expecting that. The Galrin Security Compact has protocols, he started. I know what the protocols say, I said. I've been briefed on them thoroughly, and I know that none of those protocols include provisions for reviewing the clearance of a liaison officer based on their personal bond status. That's not in the security framework. I paused. So I'm curious what this conversation is actually about. The 3 Galrin officers looked at each other. There was a specific kind of communication that happened between members of species with multiple arms, micro-gestures that humans weren't always trained to read. I caught the edge of it, not the specifics but the tone. The commander looked back at me. You are aware, he said carefully, that your position is unprecedented. Very aware. And you are not, he paused, uncertain about it. I'm uncertain about a lot of things, I said. I don't think that's the issue here. What's the issue here, Commander? Another pause, longer. The Galrin Security Compact has concerns, he said, that a Terran-Valdresian bonding arrangement at the succession level could create loyalties that complicate certain diplomatic security considerations. I see, I said. So the concern is that I might prioritize my personal relationship with the Valdreshan royal succession over my professional obligations to the Terran program. That is one interpretation. It's also a concern you'd raise if any human diplomat had a significant personal relationship with any compact member's senior leadership, I said. It's a standard concern. The fact that it's being raised in a hallway rather than through formal channels suggests it's not entirely standard. The commander was very still. What I mean, I said, is that this feels like an intimidation conversation disguised as a procedural one. And I want to be direct with you because I have found that being direct is generally more useful. I'm not intimidated. If the Galran Compact has formal concerns about my clearance or my conduct, I am available to address them through the appropriate channels. If this is something else, if this is the Galran Compact expressing displeasure at the Valdreshan Declaration and using me to send a message, I'd suggest that message should be sent directly to the Valdreshan Dominion and not to a human liaison officer in a hallway. One more pause. Then very slowly, the commander uncrossed his arms. In Galran body language, Cassidy later confirmed, arm uncrossing from the formal serious posture was an acknowledgement of a valid point. You are unexpectedly direct for a cultural liaison, he said. People keep saying that, I said. I'm starting to think the bar is very low. The commander looked at me for a long moment. We will address our concerns through formal channels, he said. I appreciate that, I said. And for what it's worth, I think formal channels are almost always better. Things get heard properly. He nodded once. Then all three of them moved off down the corridor with that heavy, deliberate Galran gait. I stood in the hallway and waited until they were out of sight. Then I leaned against the wall for about 30 seconds and breathed. Then I called Cassidy. Something just happened, I said. Tell me everything, she said. Chapter 12, What I Learned About Smiling. Sarevith asked me once, about 4 months in, what I thought had actually happened. Between us. What the mechanism was underneath the ceremony and the political implications and the 47 messages. We were in the embassy's cultural archive, one of the upper floors, surrounded by 4,000 years of Valdreshan recorded history in forms I couldn't entirely read. She was sitting cross-legged on a low bench with a reading tablet in her lap, which was the most informal I'd ever seen her, and I was standing at a window looking at the city below. I think, I said, that you saw me not being afraid. That's part of it, she said. And I think, I paused. I think the smile was a kind of invitation, not a deliberate one. But in human social language, a smile means, I see you and I'm open to you. It's an invitation to be seen back. And I accepted it, she said. Without me knowing, I'd extended it. She was quiet for a moment. In Valdreshan culture, she said, we have a concept called Varison. You know this now. But the more complete definition, the one that doesn't translate well, is not just recognized potential. It is the specific experience of seeing something that could not have been manufactured. Something that is what it is because no one decided it should be. Authentic, I said. More than authentic, she said. Authentic can be a quality someone cultivates. What I am describing is pre-authentic, the thing that exists before someone decides to present it. I turned from the window to look at her. You know what's funny, I said. Tell me. I've spent 3 years as a diplomatic liaison being trained to be authentic. To communicate genuine interest and openness. To build real connections across cultural lines. I paused. And the moment that apparently worked, the one that started all of this, was the one where I wasn't doing any of that. I was just existing. She smiled slowly. I'd been learning the Valdreshan smile. It was smaller than a human smile, more in the eyes than the mouth, but it was unmistakable once you knew it. Yes, she said, that is exactly right. That's either deeply profound or a very uncomfortable lesson about professionalism. Both, she said. Almost all important things are both. Epilogue, the line that stays. Chapter 13, 6 months later. 6 months after the Valenthar, I stood in the great hall of the Valdreshan embassy one more time. Not for a ceremony, not for a diplomatic event. Not because anyone required me to be there. Because she'd asked if I wanted to come see something. It was early morning. a time when the embassy was largely quiet, staff not yet in full attendance, the building in its resting state. She met me at the entrance herself rather than sending veil. She was in something simple and dark, her silver-threaded hair unadorned. She led me through the embassy's interior to a part of the building I hadn't been in before, the lower floors, where the oldest parts of the original construction were preserved. The Valdreshan Dominion had built this embassy early in the contact period, when the architecture was done in the old style, before they adapted to Terran aesthetic preferences. She brought me to a room with curved stone walls and no windows and no modern lighting. The only light came from those luminescent veins in the stone floor, and it was the softest light I'd ever been in. In the center of the room was a single object on a raised stone platform. It was a recording device of some kind, old by Valdreshan standards, which meant extraordinarily old by any other. But it was still active. Its surface pulsed slowly. "This is the first record made on this planet by a Valdreshan," she said. "When we first arrived in this system, before contact, before any of what came after." I looked at it. What did they record? "A name," she said. "The keeper of names at the time recorded the name of our envoy, the first Valdreshan to set eyes on your world." A pause. "It is our tradition, to record the name of the first who sees a new thing. The record stays even after the person is gone." I understood why she was showing me this. "You'll outlive me by centuries," I said. It wasn't a complaint, just a fact I was finally saying out loud. "Yes," she said, "I will. And after I'm gone, you'll—" "I will have known you," she said simply. "I will have the record of that, and the record—" She gestured at the device, at the 4,000-year-old pulse of light in the stone. "The record stays." I stood in the soft light of a Valdreshan stone room and thought about a smile I hadn't meant to give, and a moment I hadn't known was happening, and a chain of events that had brought me here. "I want to go to Valdres Prime," I said, "for the ceremony. When you think it's time." She looked at me. "I want to say something true," I said. "In front of your court, something I haven't said to anyone else." I paused. "I've been thinking about what it might be, and I think I know." "What is it?" she said. I looked at the ancient recording device, at the pulse of light that had kept a name alive for 4,000 years. "That I've been in rooms full of brilliant and powerful beings from 17 star systems," I said. "And the most extraordinary thing I've seen in all of it was 2 seconds of your eyes finding mine in a crowd and something in them deciding I was worth looking at." I paused. "That's what I want to say, that the most extraordinary thing that happened to me in space was being seen. By you, by mistake. Before either of us knew it was happening." The room was quiet. The light pulsed. She crossed the space between us, not quickly, in that unhurried way that her species moved as if they had all the time available. And when she reached me, she looked down at me from that Valdreshan height, and her amber eyes held everything that didn't need to be said. "They told me humans were fragile," she said softly. "Yeah," I said, "people say that." "They never said you were capable of this." "Of what?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Of making a 4,000-year-old civilization feel like it was seeing something new. And that's the thing about smiling. You never know who's on the other side of it. You never know what they're carrying, what they're looking for, what quality in the world they've been watching for so long they'd almost stopped believing it existed. You never know when an automatic reflex, a nothing moment, a blink, a half-second of eye contact, is actually the most significant thing you've ever done." I thought my smile meant nothing. I was wrong. Sometimes the smallest true thing is the only thing that matters.